everybody. This is Tuesday Morning Grind episode number 38. Today we have Mike Meyer with us. Mike's the VP of Security at SalesLoft, has an extensive background in the audit and consulting space, a lot of certifications, privacy certifications, security certifications, and you work at SalesLoft, which is an Atlanta staple here. It's gotten about $250 million in funding and is yet another unicorn here in the Atlanta area with a $1.1 billion valuation. And you've been there for a whole lot of that journey, building a security program. So, Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Mike, obviously, you and I know each other from before we worked together at SalesLoft. So, Risk 360 and SalesLofts worked together, but we were in consulting together before that. So, I'd love to just give you an opportunity. You're one of these guys who has grown up from consulting all the way to the head of security at a really cool startup. Can you talk about your journey? How'd you get there? How'd you get into the space?
Yeah, a whole lot of things I couldn't have foreseen, years ago when I started my career. I started working at Deloitte in the technology risk practice. From there, I got a little bit of exposure to SOC 2 and service auditing. And then where you and I worked together was at Shellman. So spent some time at Shellman. Excellent firm. Can't speak highly enough of Shellman and the time I had there. Learned from lots of great, service auditing and security and GRC professionals in that space, or in my time at Shellman. And actually, one of the things that was that directly led to my experience or the opportunity to work with SalesLoft and start on this journey was getting to work with SalesLoft as an auditor for one of their projects when they were just kind of getting started with their SOC 2. And so when it came time for them to actually hire somebody to kind of to build the security program full time, instead of some of the folks that were sort of doing the security stuff really well, by the way, but kind of on the side in addition to their day job, that ended up being a great fit, and the rest is history, as they say.
So you took the journey that a lot of folks want to take, and that you kind of start your career in that big consulting firm at Deloitte, move through, and then eventually come the head of security at a client or someone in the field that you're experiencing. What was the calculation like for you in terms of making the jump from the consulting space into industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think some of it was experiencing SalesLoft as a consultant and getting to be in the office, getting to work with some of the people who were there, getting to see the incredible journey that they were on and that they clearly had in front of them. And then some of it was also, hey, I get all this exposure, this kind of mile wide, inch deep exposure to all these different companies. When I find one, I want to go deep. I want to dive in and work with that company and get to know their security program inside and out. And then also not just get to know it, but be part of building it. So it's one thing to go into an established security program and lead something that's already been built. That mentality of wanting to build something, I think, is really what stood out for me as a huge driver for that change.
Huge opportunity. So a lot of security leaders. What I like about what you've done and the opportunity that you've had at SalesLoft is SalesLoft has had a meteoric rise in terms of growth and exposure, and you were kind of there at that upside and had an opportunity to build that. And as a security leader, you kind of have to sit back and take stock in what you're building before you do it. So can you talk about, like, you came from consulting, obviously had a little bit of knowledge of SalesLoft because they were a client, but then you had to build the program. What was your kind of first 90 days taking stock of what needed to do, what the priorities were, and how to begin that journey? I
love the question. I love the immediate story that comes to mind for me with that is when I first started at SalesLoft, I spent a lot of time, I tried to spend a lot of time listening, just understanding what is this company, what are the potential risks, what's the day-to-day life of a security professional at SalesLoft going to look like? What does the life of an employee look like, and what does each employee need to know about their responsibility when it comes to security? But so one day, my boss was one of the co-founders, a guy named Rob Foreman, hired me in. He's our president and chief strategy officer today. He and I took a walk during a one-on-one kind of around the block in our old office in Buckhead. And I'm just going down this list of like, here's a bunch of stuff I think we should do. And we get back and we go to the Octane that was there at Atlanta Tech Village, and you sit down and it's like, so what do you think? how do we tackle this? And he's like, just go do it. And I remember thinking, all right, let's do it. And so from there, it was all about building a roadmap, right? Understanding, all right, you can't do all these things at once. At the time, it was a team of one with lots of extremely helpful team members throughout the company, but nobody's dedicated to security at the time. And so the next step was, all right, what are the immediate things that we can start to tackle? And actually, one of the things that before I even came in, the company had an initiative to go ahead and get ISO 27001 certified. And so that ended up being kind of the number one priority was getting our ISO 27001 certification. And by the way, not just checking the box to make sure we pass the audit, but actually putting processes and controls in place that would scale with the business. So
security has the habit. There's kind of two archetypes of security folks. There's the pushovers, I would say. They're going to do what they're told, maybe do the compliance, check the box. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other type that like the sky is falling, everything's a disaster. And neither one of those approaches really work because you kind of have to really think about what the business's objectives are and try to accomplish those. But to do that, you have to have some influence. Mm-hmm. How did you go about, and I'm having worked in many startups, like sales growth, hiring people, those are top priorities. Mm-hmm. How did you get leadership to pay attention to information security long enough to accomplish your mission? How did you gain that influence?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one. I think there's one thing I would say I wish I would have done better at the time, and I've had an opportunity as I've been here a while to kind of build. But something I would have changed in the first 90 or so days would have been build relationships with the people who you're going to be working with, right? You're going to be working with IT. You're going to be working heavily with sales if you're in this kind of environment, a SaaS startup. You're going to be working with the engineering and technology teams, the product team. And like I said, I've had an opportunity now to kind of build those relationships, but I wish that would have been a higher priority for me at the beginning, because the context for that influence that you mentioned is there if you've got the relationships, right? If you've got that foundation of trust with the people you're working with, when you talk about something as critical, something that is going to be critical for the business, there's at least some context there, and it's not like the only exposure that team has to you is you saying the sky is falling, right? If I'm saying the sky is falling, it's because the sky is falling, and we need to do something about it. As opposed to if you haven't had time to build those relationships, then, like I said, the only exposure that you have with those teams or with those leaders in the business is this guy's kind of always, Chicken Little, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are you doing today? I mean, you have a very large organization, hiring people all the time. You have a program in place, but you still have to, keep security top of mind for a pretty big employee base and a leadership base. Right. What kind of stuff do you do today to educate and train and keep it in top of mind?
Yeah, so we meet with each team in different ways throughout the year. We just had a meeting with our product team at their all hands to kind of talk through at a high level what our security team does, and then also kind of what some of the emerging trends in the security landscape are. And we talk a lot about data privacy too. GDPR is a huge area of focus for us at our team. But I also, in that meeting and with other team meetings, I try to make sure that we're also treating that as a learning experience for us, right? Nobody knows our product better than our product team. Yeah. I'd like to understand what they view as the potential risks long-term to the product or to our customers through our product, right? And so that we can appropriately address them, over time and prioritize them through our risk management methodology. And so that's, one of the things we do is just literally just have FaceTime with those teams. We have, we use Slack as a communication tool, and we've got lots of different channels for, to interact with our support team, our tech ops team, our IT team. So that security doesn't stay kind of on an island. We've also worked really hard to just embed ourselves into processes. So if there's a new feature going into the platform, we have eyes on that. We at least know about it, and we have the ability to throw up the flag and say, hey guys, I think this could potentially be either a compliance issue or there's a security concern. And then thinking about kind of, at more of an executive level, we have a risk council that meets on a quarterly basis. And the purpose of that is just to stay informed across legal, technology, product, finance, to make sure that we've got visibility into the risks that the business faces from an InfoSec perspective. But again, it's not just me talking. I want to hear from other folks in that meeting as well if there's something that we're missing.
Yeah, as a consultant, we have this. There's pros and cons of being in consulting and being in industry. As a consultant, you alluded to this early. You got a lot of reps. Like you get to see a lot of different environments, see what folks are doing well, not well, which means that you can bring those suggestions to other clients, but you never get to go as deep. Form relationships, see what it's like to maintain a program for a long time, that kind of thing. As you have watched SalesLoft grow and get rounds of funding, how have you seen, if at all, security play a role in terms of like M&A strategy or funding rounds or board of directors caring about security? Are they asking questions, not asking questions? What's the role of the board these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think more and more the question comes up, right? It comes up from members of our board want to know what our security posture is, what we're doing to fight off the stuff that you read about in the news, right? And so, I think increasingly security is just becoming a commonplace topic of conversation, which is good news for all of us in the industry. That said, there are more eyeballs on it and people have more questions. There are more conversations with the board. You mentioned specifically, funding rounds, and, as part of our the one I remember being the heaviest was kind of our Series C funding. We talked a lot about security, and, we want to make sure that we are telling the story. And I think that's kind of part of the security leader responsibility these days, is being able to tell the story. We do all these different things. We do vulnerability management, threat detection. We have all these training programs. What is the story that we're trying to tell about security at SalesLoft? And so, that was a huge learning experience for me, is just, walking investors through that and through how we think about security.
How do you prep for that? Because I know, like, when I do a speaking event, I've been increasingly thinking about like telling stories and stuff like that as well. Yeah. Talk about like, how do you get ready? That's an important meeting. You're like, could potentially impact funding for a rapidly growing organization. Who's in the room? Do you have your CEO in the room? Do people want to see it in advance? What's the level of preparation and stress that goes into like getting ready for something like that?
Yeah. And by the way, it's certainly not just me in the room, right? We've got other folks who are, privy to those conversations, as well as, privy to our security program as part of their role. And one of the pieces of that story that we try to make sure that we're telling, whether it's customers or investors or the board or whoever, is that security is not, while there is a security dedicated team, it is not a function of just that team. And so, our CTO, Scott Mitchell, he is, he wouldn't say this, but I would. He is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to security. And so he's a huge asset to our security program. And so making sure that customers see that security extends well beyond the security team walls, so to speak, I think is important and helps to tell that story. Speaking about storytelling specifically, it's not something that I'm naturally gifted at. It's something I've definitely had to work at. But a skill I'm learning to build on. I don't know if you've had the same experience.
Exact same experience. It's totally unnatural to do that. So you have to
Some
practice.
People are just naturally gifted for it,
So you mentioned kind of org structure. So one of the conversations I have with a lot of our clients that are kind of the high growth tech space is how do you even structure an organization in terms of a successful security organization? You already talked about how it's not the security team. You might be the steward of security, but you're not the security team. You have engineers and others.
Right.
Can you talk about how security is structured at SalesLoft and how it grew over time and what you've seen be successful?
Yeah. We probably went through about 10 different iterations or 10 different ideas of how you could structure the team, because there's no two security teams are going to be structured the exact same way. You could break it up by discipline. You could say AppSec infrastructure, corporate security as one way of splitting it up, or you could do it how we've done it, which is we've got a governance, risk, and compliance team, which is responsible for policies, procedures. They actually own our training program, as well as compliance with all of the different frameworks that we align with, ISO and SOC 2 and GDPR, et cetera. And then we've got our security operations team, which is responsible for two things at a high level: vulnerability management and threat detection. Right? We've got all these different scanning systems that tell us, when you've got a vulnerability in an open source software dependency, or an operating system level vulnerability, or CSPM is giving you 100 different things to sort through. Right? Who is in charge of actually manning those scanning systems and ensuring that things are being patched in accordance with SLAs? And threat detection is the other part of that, right? When an alert comes in, who's responsible for being that first level of, hey, guys, we got an alert, we got to go investigate this, and then helping to make sure that we follow our incident response process. And the last team is engineers, right? Our engineers are responsible for building. So those systems didn't get deployed by themselves. The engineers are responsible for actually, deploying new systems, new technology, and in some cases, new processes to ensure that we are, that we've done good threat modeling, that we have systems in place to detect threats where necessary, to capture vulnerabilities in areas that maybe we haven't before. And so, that's kind of at a high level. That's how we've really broken it up. And then, we've got some plans in the future to also have kind of a trust team that's dedicated to specifically serving customers. Very
cool. On the engineering side, so this is a common challenge everywhere. So we use this platform Phalanx that you know about, Mike, and we did an analysis of what percentage of our clients are impacted by what categories of findings, and we found that like 98% of our clients have issues in SDLC and engineering, which was surprising for me because most of our clients are high growth tech companies, which means they're DevOps, DevSecOps. So I thought it would be much lower. Yeah. But what we found was, and I'd love to know if this is your experience, but there's, especially at a startup, there's always this relationship of how fast can I get a product to market, new features to market, to remain competitive and grow quickly, versus maybe slowing down a little bit to implement security or embedding security directly in. How have you guys approached that? Have you hired like dedicated security engineers? Have you focused on tool sets and automation to enable existing engineers? What does that look like for you guys? What have you seen work?
Yeah. I mean, the mentality that we have, and it's, we're not perfect at it, and I would say nobody is, but we're trying to be better and better at shifting left in the development process, moving security further and further left in the process. And so, you think about like our CI/CD pipeline. We use our static analysis tools are there, right? We have I mentioned open source issues, right? We use SNCC for that, and so. We've put a number of tools in place to help. We've also put process in place. And when there's a new feature being created, the security team has visibility into those new features and has an opportunity to say, hey, this could potentially pose a problem. And then we've also done, and this is an area that I think we'll continue to build on, but we've done threat modeling at a high level, right? So understanding based on the threat objectives that are relevant to a given system or a given feature, right? What are the potential threat objectives? What are the crown jewels associated with that objective? And then working back from there, what are the different vectors to potentially achieve that? What controls are in place? What controls are missing? And then what would an indicator of compromise potentially look like in light of that pattern, right, that we've identified?
Yep.
And so, kind of a hodgepodge of technology and process that we put in place. You mentioned people. We have not hired like an AppSec engineer. Part of the challenge that we've thought about there is we've got like development or delivery team pods across the engineering team. And so the question is kind of, where does that person fit? Right? How does somebody who works on a completely different product surface way over here, how are they able to communicate with this team over here that is kind of totally unrelated?
Mm-hmm.
And just having a single AppSec professional to be able to speak all of those languages across the entire platform is pretty tough.
Yeah, I like the.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I like the approach of like kind of integrating DevSecOps into the whole pipeline, like you guys have done in terms of tool sets and things like that. That seems like a good first step. And then I see some organizations begin to hire those full-time resources, but I like the approach you guys have taken in terms of integrating it into the process. Makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like there's no right or wrong way to do it. I guess there could be a wrong way to do it. But there's no right way to do it. There are multiple ways to skin that cat.
Yeah. So one of the things when we're working with you guys that I'm always impressed with is it's from the outsider's perspective. It seems like you are often able to get the resources you need to do stuff that makes sense. And the reason I say that's unique is because often in other clients, the biggest challenge is getting any resources or budget or time at all. So it's this game of if it's not hurting from a compliance perspective, or if a client saying they're not going to do business with me, I can't really get the resource. That's more common than I wish it was. But when we work with SalesLoft, typically if it makes sense, you guys have it, or you're thinking about it, or you're moving into the process. What do you chalk that up to? What's the process that you follow to successfully get resources and budget?
Yeah, and I wish there was some secret sauce, but I think it's a combination of a lot of things. And at the top, I think it probably stems from having a lot of security aware and competent people throughout the business, which isn't necessarily that the security team has done an amazing job training people. I like to think that we can take some credit for that, but I think we just have a lot of people who get it. When I joined SalesLoft, we actually had a lot of security people or people with security backgrounds at the company already in our DevOps team, and one of our co-founders was actually had an extensive background in security, and so that's definitely part of it, right? Having people who know that world a little bit, is super helpful. I also think relationship building has been, again, going back to that context, so that when we say, hey, in fact, one of the things I remember from the early days was actually there was an audit finding that we didn't have enough capacity on our security team from Risk 360.
Yeah.
So we presented that in our risk council and said, hey, look, it's, part of this business case that we're building here is we're getting the same feedback from our auditors as well. And so, just being able to bring those findings and have the contextual relationships to help, help drive urgency, but from a place of trust, that if we're saying it's a big deal, it probably is, That's
key. To me, that's like the most key thing. The fact that your executive peers can trust you. Like, they know that your interests are aligned to the businesses. You're not just asking for resources because you want to build this little kingdom and have a bunch of resources. You're saying, no, to move the ball forward, I need these resources. And if they trust you, they'll give you those resources. And it seems like not just at the security team, by the way, SalesLoft as a whole is well known to have that great kind of culture, and it pays off. And that's a weird thing about culture. As a side point is it shows up in places that you wouldn't expect. Like, people expect security to be a very technical problem, but if you have a good corporate culture built on trust, well, that means when you have executives that need things and they ask for them, they typically get them, and they also ask reasonable requests, and then you have a better security program because you have trust at the top, which is cool.
Yeah. And one more point on that, Christian, I think it's worth calling out that our executive team, it's not like somebody just asks the question and says, hey, I need resources and we've got this great relationship, so here you go. But I think, in any healthy organization, there's this idea that conflict and the ability to say, I disagree, or pressure test an assumption and force somebody to state their business case and defend it. I think that's healthy, right? And I think I have not been perfect in that. Like, if you look at my record of hey, I'm making a business case and then an executive pushes back, there have been moments where I've had to really question, like, I actually thought this was a good idea. And now the assumption or the challenge I just got from our CTO makes me totally rethink that. I go back to the drawing board and say, actually, let's talk about this again in 3 months. I think you're right.
Yeah. It's like, well, when you put it that way, maybe we don't need this.
Right. And without giving specific examples, we've definitely had that happen where we've had to go, hey, I think there's a different way to approach this.
Good stuff. So let's talk about COVID-19. So obviously everybody knows 2 years ago, the world went remote, and a lot of startups, and from what I know about SalesLoft, I mean, you guys were, riding scooters around the office, like very traditional startup culturally from the outsider's perspective, a lot of culture built on the vibe in the office, the buzz, the energy, a lot of drive-bys in terms of walking by folks' office, just very positive, upbeat place. And you guys had like Slack and all the remote tools already, I believe. But talk about that. How did that impact you guys moving, or COVID? I assume you guys went remote. Can you talk about like what happened? How did it impact you guys, and how did you continue to manage the security program, and how do you continue to do that?
I mean, I think we, as a business, just like everyone else, we learned one that we could do it, which was interesting. I think that's probably the most important takeaway, that like we actually, as a business, we did really well during COVID. And we continue to, which is great. We have really good product market fit for a world like that. But there's also this, culturally, internally, when you look at the way things changed, I think probably the biggest change was, to your point, the drive-bys don't exist anymore. The quick conversations where I say, hey, you know what? I've got a super quick question. I think I know the answer. I'm going to go talk to somebody on our DevOps team and see if I can get an answer on that. And also, by the way, get my steps in for the day by going up to, a different floor to talk to somebody. Now that became, every one of those conversations became a 30-minute meeting. And so just the time management aspect of our lives had to kind of be adjusted. But that said, I almost wonder if I don't know this, but I almost wonder if it balanced out because we were able to have more heads down time when we needed it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, it's just a different dynamic, a different type of a different like time management skill when you're all remote versus in the office.
Were there any technology changes? Like as a startup, we often benefit from already having a modern technology stack that's a little more agile than others. Yep. But if you think about like endpoint devices or infrastructure, were there any pivots that you guys had to make, or were you able to kind of just continue business as normal, but now people are at home?
It was mostly business as usual for us. Actually, part of our kind of business continuity planning from the beginning had that built in, right? That we use cloud-based systems, and not much should change in the event of a disaster. So it was really interesting to go look at our BCP at the beginning of the pandemic and go, all right, it looks like we're actually pretty well prepared for this thing. And obviously, we learned a ton, and things like Zoom bombing and stuff like that became real for us pretty quick, and we had to make sure that we had the right settings in place in Zoom and other systems. But by and large, we weren't deploying modern cloud applications for the first time like a lot of companies may have had to do. And so I think we were fortunate from that perspective. We did change some things technologically to kind of help us adapt to the changing workforce, but that was less a security thing and more of a culture thing.
Sure. Leadership. So, I think most security professionals, at least many, aspire to be, a CISO or a VP of information security. I've had the pleasure of working with you and your team and former team members. I know a guy that we work with now that used to be at SalesLoft is now himself a leader at another organization, which is very cool, right? You get to watch those leaders grow. It's kind of a little, I feel successful because look what I helped someone develop into that, which is great. Right. So talk about that. What's your, how do you go about developing teams, leading teams? Mm-hmm. Are you formal, informal about it? What's your position there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like structure. I like for there to be, clearly stated goals. I like for people to know what they're responsible for producing. By the way, I'm not saying that I'm good at actually practicing that. It's something I'm trying to be better and better at as a leader. But establishing clear goals, making sure that people know what their job responsibilities are. Giving people clear metrics where they make sense, and also recognizing that like a numerical metric may not actually be the best way to measure performance. That can be tough for somebody who likes structure. But thinking about how I like built the team, the most important thing for me is hiring people that can do things that you can't. So I came from a background as an external auditor to companies who wanted SOC 2 or SOC 2 reports and ISO certifications. So what would it look like for me to hire GRC professionals who have been on the other side of the desk? What would it look like for me to hire engineering and ops professionals? We actually brought in an engineer to our team over from our tech ops team who brought a ton of infrastructure knowledge to our team and is an unbelievable resource for us. And so, I think that would be my my number one piece of advice to anybody building a team is make sure as you're building your team, hire people who can do things you can't. Don't hire a bunch of copies of you. Hire people who have the skills you don't have, so that you get that wide breadth of skills on your team. And to your point about, having people leave the company and go be successful in other places, it can be hard to stomach at the time, but man, in all seriousness, it gives me pride to see somebody, leave our program and go on, start another one and be successful somewhere else.
Sure. What about coaching and mentoring? Do you do any kind of formal coaching with others or performance reviews or is it kind of informal? What have you seen work for you?
Yeah. And it's especially interesting when you hire people who have skills you don't have. Like the main thing you can add, the main benefit you can provide is through coaching and mentoring and seeing some of the pitfalls that, that they may be going through that you've gone through in the past. Maybe not from a technical perspective, but from a professional, relationship building perspective. It could be as simple as, the way somebody communicates over email, right? Talking them through that and helping them to develop in that way. I do one-on-ones with all of my direct reports on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, just depending on preference. I find that time to be, if for no other reason, it's just a time to catch up, right? We may talk about our personal lives the entire 30 minutes. Generally, we do talk work stuff, but at least for me, and I hope they feel the same way. I hope the team feels the same way, right? It's a time for us to just catch up and make sure that people are in a good place, and then to provide that constructive feedback if it's needed. But also making sure that, in addition, and I would say more importantly, is providing the like, hey, you crushed it on this project, like those kinds of making sure you celebrate the wins, because man, I mean, you're going to be moving, if you're starting a security program at a SaaS startup that's growing super fast, you are going to be moving at 100 miles an hour all the time. And it's going to be really easy not to celebrate the wins. You've got to take that pause to just say, we did this. We knocked this out of the park, and celebrate those wins so that there's, again, keep using this word, but context for those constructive conversations. For
sure. So let's talk about, not SalesLoft in particular, but just like the emerging threat environment that we're dealing with. I think everyone probably listening to this has heard the headlines about ransomware. That's plaguing everyone. Phishing stuff hitting folks and people losing fortunes because a routing number got changed. There's all sorts of tragic and terrible things that are happening. As a security leader who has built a security program for a fairly high-profile startup, what kind of stuff keeps you up? Or do you hear people ask questions about or trends and stuff what are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things you mentioned absolutely do. Ransomware is, some of the more modern tech stacks may not be as susceptible to ransomware, but man, like you cannot have that mentality. You've got to have the mentality that you're next, right? And what can you do to prevent it? And so ransomware is a super interesting topic of conversation, particularly going back, and this is, by the way, not to throw shade, this can happen to anyone, but Garmin was the one that we looked at and went, this is infrastructure. They're attacking platform infrastructure here, not corporate infrastructure. And that was an interesting shift. And it kind of made us rethink, hey, what is our ransomware strategy from an infrastructure perspective? And so ransomware is a big one. And by the way, a big piece of that is not just how you protect against it, but also how you respond to it. In the event that something does happen to your business, what's the plan, right? This goes for ransomware, but also other attack vectors, like consult with people who have dealt with it before, right? And so yeah, that's a big one. Another one that I don't think you mentioned, but we talk about a lot is supply chain. And we've just from, if you look at SolarWinds or CodeCov, any of these kind of high profile supply chain attacks that have happened recently, from our perspective, it's one, you've got to have good GRC controls on the front end to make sure that you're, only working with vendors that are reputable, that you trust. But even then, you've got to have as many compensating controls in place, as many detective controls as you possibly can to identify when something's potentially gone wrong. And so, thinking about, we think about supply chain a lot, and just making sure that our the vendors that we do allow into our environment, or access to sensitive information, that they are that they continue to operate with good security controls and good security posture, but also as much as possible that we control what that vendor has access to, and that we're kind of observing as much as possible what they're doing in our environment. And then the last one, I guess, that I would call out is that we talk about a lot is insider threat, and that's not as much of an emerging trend. That's kind of a tale as old as time, but we want to make sure that as much as we have a foundation culturally built on trust, that we also, as a security team, that we are verifying that our employees are doing things in the technology environments that we trust them with access to, that they're operating in a way that we would expect, and also that employees just are trained on the signs and what to look for.
Sure.
When it comes to insider threat.
You mentioned supply chain, which I think is interesting because most of our clients, probably the number one or two thing that they complain about is the number of security questionnaires that they are on the receiving end of. Because if you're a business to business SaaS provider like SalesLoft and like many other companies, you are a member of the supply chain and you have suppliers, which means that the dreaded security questionnaire and the relationships with customers and conversations during the sales cycle can consume a lot of your time in your day. Right. How have you navigated that challenge in terms of like customer interface, gaining trust with clients?
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. It was a great segue from supply chain to security questionnaires. If you look back 4 or 5 years ago, the security team was handling virtually every questionnaire that came in. And it was one person would be, responsible for doing an entire questionnaire. We've now got a team of commercial and enterprise sales engineers who the security team works very close with to make sure that they're trained up, that they have the information they need to answer those questions accurately. And then the security team has this kind of high level, we'll help fill in the gaps. We'll do the QA, make sure that the questionnaires are truthful in presenting our program in the right light. And so, we've come a long way in terms of the scalability of that process. Even still, it is an immense burden because companies care about these supply chain attacks. And of course, as given our position in the tech stack, we get access to CRM, we get access to email. We are absolutely, and rightly so, we should be considered part of that supply chain. So we get it. But it's about, how do we put a process in place that actually, one, is scalable for us, and two, ultimately builds trust with our customers.
Interesting. So you guys have accomplished something that I think a lot of organizations want to accomplish, in that they have empowered some of their sales engineers to have access to data to self-serve on some of these questions. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was the process? Did you use a tool? Were you training them? What does that look like for you all?
Yeah, so we've had a couple different iterations. We've used a couple tools. Lupio and HyperComply have been a couple of the tools that we've used to basically keep sales engineers informed of security team certified answers that they can give to questions, right? So that they know, hey, I'm putting this in there, and maybe I don't understand this perfectly from a technical perspective, but I know somebody in the security team did sign off on this. It is still a challenge, right? You still get stuff in those systems that goes stale after a while and maybe isn't the best information. But that's why we're there, right? We're there to kind of be that additional quality control. And also, like I said, fill in the gaps. We have a whole Slack channel that's just sales engineers asking for help with questionnaires. And And like I said, we get that it is part of the business, and we want to build trust with our customers. And so that's one of the avenues that we're able to do it.
Excellent. So last question, Mike. You've done a great job building a career, building a security program at a great company. There's a lot of other people who want the opportunity or want to do some of the things that you've done. So what advice would you give either a young leader in their first kind of security leadership role or looking to get into that role about building a security program and kind of their first CISO gig? Are there a couple of things that stick out to you as lessons learned or things that you'd be like, hey, look, pay attention to this and you'll be successful?
Yeah. I would say if you're coming from because there's so many different journeys you can take to get to a security leadership role. If you're coming up through kind of an audit or consulting kind of background where you're getting exposure to lots of different teams, it can be easy to focus on the project at hand. But I would encourage people to take a look outside of just the project that they're working on. Take a look at the way teams are structured. What are the responsibilities of that team? What are some of the risks that those teams serve to mitigate that maybe aren't in the scope of your audit? Because when I came over to SalesLoft, we started getting questions from customers that was like, yeah, we should probably have a control in place for that, right? And so that helped me to kind of see, there's a lot more to this than just the SOC 2 and ISO 27001 frameworks, obviously, right? Obviously they provide a good framework and they provide kind of a good foundation for the program, but there's going to be so much that, you could be ISO 27001 compliant and not effectively mitigate risk across the business. But then if you think about kind of the engineering or operations team routes, I obviously did not come up through those routes. But I would say, be in your journey up to leadership, obviously be a sponge, ask tons of questions. And I know that's advice that everybody gives. But try to understand the security landscape, not just what's going on in your business, but beyond. And then I would say once you're in that role, once you're able to kind of get into that leadership role, listen more than anything, understand what the problems are that the business faces, whether it's from a security perspective or otherwise. Make sure that you're building relationships with the people who you're going to work with every day. If you're in a SaaS startup, you're going to be working a lot with your DevOps team. You're going to be working a lot with the engineers. You're going to be working with your IT team heavily. And so make sure that you're building those relationships and just getting to know the people around you. And I'll say it one more time, but just to have the context for those tougher discussions. You never want to be shaking hands during an incident, right? So you want to make sure you know everybody going into those.
Good advice. Great advice. So if you guys enjoyed this conversation, you can check out Tuesday Morning Grind on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Risk 360. We have a playlist called Tuesday Morning Grind. You can check it out, or you can listen to this on any of your favorite podcast apps, and we're available. The other thing that you can do is something new that we're doing here at Risk 360. Mike, you might find this interesting, is we're creating whole playlists that break down different security frameworks, control by control, and then just give that information away for free. So if you're thinking about building an ISO program and you want to know how every control objective works and the auditor's perspective on it, we have that. If you want to do the same thing for SOC 2 or other frameworks, we're building that out as well. So check all of that out on YouTube. Give us feedback, comment, subscribe. We appreciate that. Mike, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.